Hey everyone, what is up? Welcome back to this very short series on how to build a finance app with AI. So just to recap the last episode, I just went over right into it to see what we could do with AI, how far it could take us. And I did spend a little bit extra time on it, but I made it to a point where I didn't think it was as helpful. I think the first episode was like good insight into like how I'm prompting and everything. But now I'm just going to go over a recap of what I did and how I got there with AI and what I had to do, if anything, myself as the engineer to fix a few things. I just wanted to go over this because everyone might take it a little bit different. I don't think if you're learning too much from the AI prompting, but it's helpful to know how you got from one place to another. The first episode, we literally just started with a blank template. Um, and I try to see like how far AI can get us to start with. And one thing right off the bat is I did try to use this library called React Native Reusables. In the last series on how to build threads, we used GlueStack, which is pretty similar. React Native Reusables tries to be like ShadCN for mobile. My mistake was assuming that AI would find that in the library and then use that moving forward. But I got to a point where I wasn't even paying attention to the styling too much because unlike Threads or TikTok, there was no specific design that we were following. I mentioned Mint a little bit for feature-wise, but I think there was like a lot of changes that I did to get it to this point. You could see it on the right-hand side where I wanted the features that I had. So a little background that I had a finance tracking app that I had built. It was mostly started as a React Native app, and then I moved it to a web app because there's more functionality. I hooked up with Plaid. I got the ability to a user create an account with their email to hook up their bank accounts and then hook up with Stripe to charge them for the subscription. And that's because every single bank account connection costs money. I don't know how many people talk about this too much, but it is 30 cents per connection. So it's like a 30 cents initiation and 30 cents per connection per month. So that's assuming like I think the average person probably has 5 or 6 accounts. And maybe a lot of people had even more, like 10, 12. I definitely have a lot more, just from different businesses, churning credit cards maybe. But I had a lot of them. And so when you get to a certain point where the subscription was $5.99, and if you add up all the bank account fees and then the fees from Stripe, you end up losing money along the way. So my idea for this app specifically was to try to make it as free as possible. And the big thing we did here was keep everything on the device. Not only does that make it cheaper, but it also makes it private. Your financial data is your data and it is sensitive information. And there's a lot of these apps that hook up to a database, and then if it's free, usually they're selling your data. They have to make money some way. Or if it's a paid version, it's $12, $15 a month. And that's a lot of money for a finance app. So I wanted to figure out a way to do this on the cheap or free. So we did this free. And that's how I want to keep this app. I want to keep on adding some features, maybe open source it eventually, but I've found myself using it a lot. Let's get into it real quick. So we'll go over the features and then we'll go over the details code-wise. So I got the code on the left and the actual app on the right. I created some mock data, and I think one thing AI is great for is creating mock data. Because once you have the database structure already, let's pull up the database. AI can read this database and figure out the default categories. Something like this is pretty simple for AI to do, especially with all the math calculations. It's pretty ones and zeros here. There's no messing around with what you want the app to do. There's a transaction, it has a date, it has a title, it has an amount, and a category. And it's pretty simple. And so that's all this first page is. So we have this ID, and I actually only even had the ID so that we can import a CSV from, let's say you want to import, instead of putting everything manually, you can download a CSV of all your bank transactions, your credit card transactions, and import it into the app. And that's where this ID comes in, so that if you import the same transaction multiple times, it won't duplicate the transaction. So that was a more recent ad that I did, honestly, for myself. Category ID is based off of the category interface, the category database that we have. Amount, self-explanatory, description, type, income or expense, which is how we get these red and green lines. Date, recurring type. I'm going to spend a second on this one because this is probably the hardest part to do with AI. And honestly, it's not very straightforward with just coding it yourself either. And that's because a typical app, you would have a server that's running. Maybe you could have a job in the previous app that I created, a finance app that was a paid version. I would have a job that ran every day or every hour based on whatever the requirements were. Check that user if they needed to get more transactions, old transactions from their days, and then populate their database with their information. And so there was like a third-party way of tracking or running recurring tasks. Since this is local, there is no ability to run a task. There's no external APIs. Their data is not going anywhere. And so you have to like jerry-rig this idea of a recurring subscription. And so if we create one, we could do like a test description, February 1st. And then we have this idea of one time, which is the default, daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly. So one common one would be like maybe monthly. You get a paycheck every month, or week or monthly as like a bill, your wireless bill, your gas bill, or electric bill, whatever it may be. And so let's just do daily actually for right now, just to prove a point. I don't know why some of these are duplicated, but, and then we're going to put $89 and we're going to click save. And, so all this mock data. Okay. This mock data created data for the future as well. So that's a little confusing. So maybe let's do new transaction, bills and utilities, daily, $80. That'd be a lot. It's actually $80. Okay, so it's at the top. So all this data is mock data that we created, or actually AI created. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to lie about that. And so for some reason it did in the future. It's just for this video, so it's not that important that it's creating things in the future. But we could see this transaction we just created daily. And how it works is that every single time you open the app, let's say you open the app, you close it out and you open it again, it'll check for recurring transactions. So it'll check, okay, this is a recurring transaction and it's supposed to run daily and be like, okay, today's not the 28th, so this is a little confusing. Today's February 1st, but let's just say let's assume today's February 28th. It'll see, okay, the daily transaction February 28th is already created, but let's come to, there's only 28 days in February, I think. Yeah. Let's go to March 1st. So the day later, if you come into the app the next day, be like, okay, we're missing a transaction. So create it because there's none for a daily recurring transaction on March 1st. Let's say you forget about adding transactions. You come back a week later. In that period of time, there's no job running on a third-party server or anything. So it's not technically going to exist on the application yet. But if you come back a week later, let's say we come back March 7th. So we have a week of missing transactions. So the function will just run through, be like, okay, we're going to create a transaction for March 1st, March 2nd, March 3rd, March 4th, March 5th, 6th, and then 7th to get up to date. So only run when you're in the app because it's not something that can run in the background. It's literally local to the app. So that was an interesting, I guess it's not even a bug, but interesting like use case because most apps you have connection to a server. And so that's pretty straightforward. But in this case, you had to do it a little bit differently. The other way I thought about doing recurring transactions was like, okay, we have a daily transaction for February 28th. You can like do ghost data. You could do, okay, don't put it into the database, but just show in this list a transaction with this date with each single date. So it's like, it's not physically creating a row in the database of the device, but it looks like in the transaction. And in our case, that's all that's important. As long as it looks like it's a recurring transaction, that's fine. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly, but like one is actually just ghost data. So it's just looping through, put it in this transaction and then put it here, but don't actually put it locally in the database. So it's just handling recurring transactions a little differently. I wanted to do a row every single time so that when you do export this data, it shows as a row. And I just wanted to try and keep the way we handle transactions, whether it's recurring or not, the same as much as we could. And that's where we come in, parent transaction ID. So this would be like this was chat or AI's idea of parent transaction ID of trying to track the initial transaction and then the end date. So all these are specifically for recurring transactions. And then next to category name and category emoji, pretty straightforward. Actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, I don't even know why we need this on the transaction. I'd be curious. See, this is one of those things that AI kind of created on our table, but honestly, it probably doesn't even need to be here because we already have category ID and category up here. So it's like small things like that AI would either change part of. And actually, let me get into that real quick of a quick learning of one thing you can't do with AI. It has such a small context window, at least now it does, that you can't ask it to scan all the files in our code base, which it can scan, but it won't be able to retain all the information that it scanned and then modify that. And so whenever you're working with large data sets, it's not going to do things wrong, but it's just going to skip some things. Like it's almost like it forgot to do a part of the thing that you asked. So the way you want to do it is, okay, if you're dealing with one change, you want to ask it to do one change at one time. And so let's say we want to make database changes. Let's stay in this file. Specifically, we don't have to add the context, we can. But if we start talking about the database and what we want to update, it's great at making small changes, or even like we want to make a change in the database and then it's also in this categories file, let's say. It could do those changes. But if it spans like 5 or 6 files, you want to piece it out into its own prompt. Let's go through to see the last thing I asked it. Oh, here's one. When we export transactions, can we make sure to include exporting our categories with them as well? So if the other device we are importing to doesn't have those categories, we can create them. Also, it's great at knowing what I'm talking about because I misspell shit all the time. Terrible typer. You probably noticed that if I watch all my other videos. Anyway, so this is you're giving it a use case. Okay. When I'm exporting transactions, and let's say this scenario, you have to paint a picture for it to what your end goal is. And that's the important part. What's the end goal and what files and how does it currently work? And maybe what you suggest. Sometimes I leave out the suggestions and see where it gets us. And I did a lot of that to begin with, and it did the same thing I was thinking about. But once you get into smaller details, you want to try and get as detailed as possible. So it understands, it makes the change, and it doesn't change a bunch of other files that are unrelated at the same time. And so in this use case, let's say me and my wife want to get our transactions in sync, but I have some categories in here that she doesn't have in hers. So this would be like, okay, all these I could export the transactions, but if she doesn't have that category, then it would just fall back to another category. So it wouldn't exactly sync up. That was another thing. Since it is local only, you can't just sync up with a third-party database. You have to manage or account for those changes across 2 different devices, 2 different time periods, and maybe multiple instances. Let's say you want to sync up every week or every month. You have to be able to handle transactions that you've already synced. And if you've made changes to those transactions, just update them or do nothing at all. There's a lot of specific use cases since it is a local only application. Okay, so next thing, we have our chart. We used victory charts. This was another thing that AI had definitely a little trouble working with. I went through 3 different charts. Let's go to tabs, index. And when it came to like just data crunching of, okay, I'm going to create, this one was super easy, like new, like I want to just filter, I want to put a search bar and I want to put it below all categories of the last 3 months. And I want to be able to string match. So it doesn't have to match exactly. So we have NE has new transactions, but NE and dinner. So this was super easy. This is straightforward. It might take a little time for us to build, but like in AI, it took 2 seconds. The graph was a little bit different because it doesn't, even though the graph is here, if I could actually find it somewhere in this huge file. Also, I did notice that if we were building this, there's no way I would make a single file that's 924 lines of code. That's ridiculous. I would piece these out into each one of their own files. But AI did that themselves. But then I looked back on it, and I did it on purpose, but I looked back on it, and there's a lot of times where you'll tell it to update something in this file, and it won't be able to find it right away. So it'll just create it again. And then you'll have two instances of the same function that sometimes gets called, and maybe it switches. It's not clear sometimes. And so for using AI, I actually preferred it to be in the same file, even though I'm coming through here to find the chart and it's just a mess. So I would not do this on my own, but it works. I can't complain too much. Here's the victory chart. So we got the victory chart, the victory axis, victory group, and it took a lot of back and forth to get these columns the way I wanted next to each other. It seems like pretty straightforward, but one, the documentation was a little all over the place. I was using documentation from different versions. So it's not like it wouldn't go to package JSON. Okay, I'm using victory charts on this version, so I'm going to go look for this documentation. It's best to just go search Google, search the package JSON version that you installed, and literally copy and paste the victory chart. So victory graph React Native. So you can see I came here, and then sometimes I would even like I would copy and paste this here, be like, okay, here's the documentation. Can you read this? I want an example like this one. So I would copy and paste this, not the whole page. That's a big example actually. Copy and paste this, like use this as an example and paste this in, and it would be super helpful and get a lot closer to what I wanted. But once it was already there, getting the critiques of like, okay, you have to change the size of these graphs, these bars, to fit based on how much data is showing. So that one was a little bit of a pain in the butt. And honestly, it's pretty slow right now because the emulator doesn't love all this data. It works great on a device, I swear. But that was a tricky one. The recurring transactions and the graphs were probably the hardest part getting to work with AI. And that's because we're using graphs in multiple areas. So we got graph here, we got graph here, and we got a graph here. And they're all a little bit different, but they're all using victory graphs. And so that was helpful. I think if I were to go into using different graphing libraries for each page, that would have been honestly a huge mess. Another learning was being specific of the type of components you want to use. So if you just let AI go free range, okay, I need a drop down and I want this data to show, honestly, it might create this drop down as like this format and then this drop down literally right next to it, maybe even with similar data with a completely different, maybe a completely different library that it would try to install because we're using agent mode, as you saw in the previous video, and then use that. So at the end, I got really specific of, okay, I want to use this library that we're already installing, and this one was Action Sheet OS. And so it's super helpful to know what type of components you want to use and the UI that you want to go for already. If I had designs that I was going off of and not just my head, this would be a lot easier because you could search a little bit first for the library that you want to use and then tell it to use that library. This one is a little bit tough because I didn't have really any idea of what this end app was going to look like. I just knew some basic functionality. This one page was probably the most I knew. And then I just kept adding features from there as I started getting more and more into it. But again, 95% of this app was built with AI, so I can't complain too much. And I will say, I started it on a Saturday, and I did 2 videos on the Saturday. I'm only going to post the one video. I only posted the one video before this one because the second one, I just think I started rambling off a little bit. I didn't find it that useful, which is why I didn't film the whole thing. In other apps, obviously, I'll get more into detail, but just watching me prompt and then try to decide whether Composer or the agent we're going to keep that or not, it was just a lot of back and forth, and I don't know how much you're learning doing that. It's good to just get into it yourself and start prompting and see where it goes from there. Another cool thing with AI that AI made super easy was exporting, importing transactions. And that's because we had the database structure already. So all we need to do is, okay, I want to be able to export a CSV with all the transactions and then their associated categories. And then I also want to be able to import a CSV in all those categories. So I started with knows the data structure from our own application. That was super easy. Then I started downloading like not bank statements, like CSVs of bank data from my own banks, like Chase, Amex, Citi, to see the format that they have, because each one of them are a little bit different. And this is like the last couple of prompts that I did. Here's a good one. Let's go to CSV import. And so the first example is super simple. What the data structure is, how it's going to be formatted. The thing I didn't really think about is here. There's a lot of regexes of, okay, remove any special characters except for basic punctuation. Remove groups of numbers, because if you look at a transaction, whether it be from Chase or Amex, they all have these weird things. Sometimes they're all uppercase and there's a bunch of random numbers or letters at the end of them. Sometimes the first part is lowercase, the second part is uppercase, all caps. So we try to normalize the data because it is coming from different places. And then they're all going to have different headers as well. So I didn't want to have to force people to change the headers. So I wanted to be able to be able to download from your bank and then import directly to your device. And then if we do import CSV, I think I was hoping to have an example. So what I do have, actually, what I did build as well, was this ability to match columns. So like it will try to guess what the columns are. So if the columns already match the fields that we have of amount, description, type, date, that's super easy. It'll automatically match. But it'll try to assume some of the data as well. So like maybe instead of description, it's name, or maybe it's title. Instead of, and not all of them have IDs either. We want to be able to account for that as well. And so there's a pop-up that will allow you to switch to match the fields from the CSV to our local database, which is pretty cool. Okay. Outside of editing, this is pretty straightforward. We can edit, we could delete, and pharmacy, it'll save, and then automatically update. That one's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go into the next page. Next page, compound interest calculator. Wow, did AI make this one easy? Because this is a lot of math that would have taken me a while to do. So the goal here is that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. So he who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. And it's a good visualization of, let's say we have all of our net worth categories in here. We probably should have started with the net worth tab, but let's say we have all of our net worth categories in here. We could visualize what that looks like over time. And we could put in the compound rate. So you could change the yearly contributions. For crypto, I have a few default numbers here. So real estate historically rates is 4% per year. Stocks 10 to 7%, depending on if you're calculating inflation, not deflation, inflation. And then technically cash, you could go like negative 2% per year. So you can see if you just sit on cash for the next 10 years, that cash is actually going to be worth $53,000 because your purchasing power. It's things like this. It's super nerdy finance-wise, but I really like seeing visually. And let's say we have credit cards that we have to pay as well. Big one here I really liked is the mortgage. If you have a mortgage, you usually have a payoff date, a fixed rate, and then an amount that you owe every single month. And that amount that changes over time. So what you put towards principal in the beginning is very little, but year 10 is a little bit more, year 20 is a lot more, and then by year 30, let's say 25 to 30, it's basically all principal. And that's just how mortgages work. And we made that calculator in here to get these calculations. So like we could change, like over time, our liabilities go down $372,000, and our growth based on our stocks and whatever, our total net worth would be 1.1 million over 10 years. And you could change the time period, and like over 10 years, 2.5 million. And then you could also change the categories as well. So stock is the big one that is like, because it's raising 10% per year, $50,000 would turn into $336,000 over 20 years. Let's say you put in $20,000 a year, that would be 1.4 million. And so it's basically a calculator, and it's exactly what it says it is. It's a calculator that takes into consideration your net worth tracker. And so this is where you actually put in the information. And you can see this button in the middle is the same for each one. Also ignore this. This is just from the mock data because we don't have unique keys. This, when we click the plus button on net worth, it is assets and liabilities. And we have like home, and we could change like the category type. But then if we go here, oh my goodness. If you go here, we have this little pop-up. It's different. It's expensive income. So we changed the action. It might be a little confusing for users, but I got an idea to keep it a little simple. And then this one's straightforward. This is almost like a transaction list, but instead of transactions, it's assets and liabilities. So there's not a ton to go here. It has the same edit and delete. The big thing here is that the only APIs I have is CoinGecko and Yahoo Finance to be able to pull in real-time prices. So if we click on this one, instead of putting in the actual price, we could say we have 1 Bitcoin, or we have 5 Bitcoin, I wish. And you can see like the overall price, and you could do the same thing for stocks as well. Since the stocks one isn't an official API, it's not all of the stocks, but it's most of them. So if we search, let's see, Chipotle, CMP, I don't know what it is. Chipotle is CMG. I don't know, whatever this is. And then you do 22. You have 22 stocks of whatever this is, CM. And then you could add it as an asset. And you can see your net worth change up here. And then once you go to your calculator, it'll take into consideration that amount that you just added. I thought that was pretty cool, associating those two. We did have to be explicit with AI of telling where the data is coming from, especially, and then how we want to change over time, because how we handle, like, if we change this, it changes the category types, but like how we handle credit cards is going to be different than how we handle mortgages. The mortgages, we wanted to take in consideration I'm going to forget the name of it. It's not the compound interest, but how much is paid over time in principal. We're not really doing any other calculations for student debt loans, even though they could have fixed rates. Credit cards would be some ridiculous, like 28%. So hopefully you don't have any credit card debt. And then cash doesn't do anything. Crypto puts in the stock API, or crypto does the CoinGecko API. Stocks do the Yahoo Finance API. I really wanted to do real estate, but it was really hard to find a legit real estate estimator. So this is literally just putting in a value, my home, and then just putting some amount. So that doesn't, 2.5 million. That'd be great. And we could see our net worth update every single time. The last thing, upcoming transactions. This is literally just a view we did all the hard work for recurring transactions over here. So this is just saying in the future, if this is a daily recurring transaction, how many do we owe in the next 30 days? And so this is what I was talking about, like the other option of you can do ghost data in the past of, okay, this recurring transaction started January 1st, 2025. And we're in February 28th, whatever today is. I think today's February 1st, yes. So over the last 30 days, we could just fill in the data in the UI based on those two criteria. But instead we're actually creating a real run the transaction. For upcoming transactions, it might change. This is just future looking, so nothing is set in stone. So we are doing ghost transactions, basically. It's just, okay, we have today's date. It's still valid. It doesn't have an end date from the database. And we want to do the for next 30 days. So that's what it shows, the next 30 days, assuming we don't stop it. And then let's say this actually, okay, we're not doing the transaction anymore. We could delete the most recent one. And I was going to say it should remove that. I got to add a reload to that one. Of course not. Okay, that was a pretty good demo. It worked up until the last moment, but you get the point. Assuming all of our income and expenses, we could look into the future. We have a net of $39.29 if we have this high ass utility every single month. That's our app in a nutshell. We have our CSV import, which we went over, which honestly is a mess. This wasn't a great one for ChatGPT or AI. Because of all the different factors, you could pass it in. What I did was copy and pasted like 3 rows of test data from different banks and then like account for these changes, but we still want to be able to import and export. So that was a big one for AI. Transactions, crypto. What else did we go over? I think we went over everything at this point. And then the compound interest calculator was a little tough because we could see this is calculate remaining balance after each year. I will say that's cool that AI actually adds comments for you. So even if you're not paying attention, if you come up, you actually know what's going on here. Amortization, that's the word I was looking for. An amortization calculator. So it basically builds an amortization calculator into the app so that if you have a fixed rate and you know exactly when the end date or the maturity date of a mortgage is, then you could calculate what your principal and interest are every month. And then you could calculate how much of that goes towards principal of you paying off the house. So I thought that was a cool one that probably would have been a big pain in the booty if I tried to do that myself. But yeah, I hope this was helpful. Like I said, I didn't want to spend too much time on going over like me just prompting back and forth. That's what I did in the first episode, but this one was more of a recap. What we ended up with, the whole time frame of building this app was I got pretty far. I basically got this whole like this one page for transactions, categories, time period in one day, but then doing all the connections of this compound interest calculator, upcoming transactions, fixing a bunch of bugs, deploying it, making sure it looked good on an app, multiple apps, multiple phones, of different sizes. That took a little bit of time. So the whole, like from very start to finish was 1 week. So Saturday to Saturday. And this is what we got. So honestly, that's pretty amazing for an app that I think there's a lot of people that pay for apps. Like obviously this doesn't have direct bank connections, but it's great because we could still import data as much or as little as we want without paying for those connections from Plaid. We don't have to share our data with Plaid or me or simplefinance.app. So if we go to in the App Store right now, and I will say this one was actually super easy to get approved for the App Store. We don't need any terms of service. We don't need any delete my account because there's nothing like I don't own any data. It's only on your device. If you want to delete your account, you just delete the app and it deletes all of the information on your phone. So that's one thing I hope is clear. You better download all your transactions if you want to keep them before you delete the app because it's going to delete all of your stuff. But it also makes it free. This could be free forever because this costs zero money to run. It costs as much as like how much data your phone can hold, which these days is a ton. And then the APIs that I use were free, so that I might get yelled at for those, but API keys are on the app itself. So that was one thing that I was trying to contemplate. I thought it was a cool feature, but that's like the only thing that might break because it's relying on data from CoinGecko and Yahoo Finance. I will say the Yahoo Finance API hasn't changed in like 30 years, so I'm pretty confident about that one. So yeah, hope you check it out. You go to mysimplefinance.app. You can download it. Like I said, it's going to be free forever. This was a project and it's a working project that you could use yourself. I would love to hear some feedback, any features. Maybe like I said, maybe I open source this so people can add more features to it and just keep on deploying changes and updates to it. And then you can secure and local. There's the Face ID. Oh, that was a cool one. Did I show that one actually? I think so. The Face ID. So it's not connected right now. I had to do this, I think, on the very first episode, but it's super simple. Like local authentication has hardware, and then it'll use your Face ID. If you have a super old phone and use like the fingerprints for development mode, this doesn't work. Just call out if you try to use this local authentication, it's not going to work. So you have to check is development and just literally skip authentication, which is fine because we're not storing any email, personal information. So nothing is really needed at all. It's just a device itself. And the database is on the device. That part is cool. I'm going to go over that. This video is turning into a little longer than I thought. We could see that the database is literally on the device itself. It's called mysimplefinance.db. If this is deleted off the device, then the data no longer exists, which is cool and scary at the same time. So hopefully you don't accidentally delete your app with all your transactions. So I hope that was helpful. And join me for the next series. I'm going to keep on doing it. I'm going to do some small, like shorter projects like this in between the longer ones. I know I just did like super long threads app with TLDR.play. So I hope you check out that one. But this is a nice short one with AI. I think I'm going to do another short one next to build what word am I looking for? An invoice creator with Stripe. I have a client that needs to accept payments, so I was going to use some AI and turn into a course to see like how easy it is to hook up with Stripe, create a landing page for a specific website, and be able to accept payments. I think it's something that probably finish in a couple hours with AI, maybe an hour with AI. But and then after that, I'm going to do the podcast app. So PodSnap coming up. I'm really excited for that one. That one's going to be unique. I'm going to go film that one a little bit differently. So I hope you join me for those, and see you next time. Peace.